Welcome to another edition of Community Matters. I'm Jim Cameron, your host and the program director of Darien TV 79. Today, we're going to be talking about flooding. There's a very important meeting coming up in a matter of days that we want to get you prepared for by doing a little stroll down memory lane of what's gone on with flooding in Darien in recent years. And I've invited Rolf Oben, who is a member of the RTM, on which I also serve, and he's from District 4, in which I also serve, to be with us on the program. Rolf, appreciate you joining us today on Community Matters.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to do this with you.
Now, Rolf gave a verbal report to the RTM a couple of weeks ago that caught my attention because he beautifully summarized what happened with the flooding. It's been over a year and maybe longer than that in some cases. And we may have forgotten how horrible the flooding in Darien was. But work has continued apace since then, the results of which are going to be shared by Ed Gentile, who is the head of the Public Works Department, at a special hearing on Thursday, May 11th at Darien Town Hall. I offer the disclaimer that Rolf has asked me to remind you that he is offering his personal opinion. He's not speaking on behalf of the Public Works Committee or the RTM, and he is not a hydrologist. He is not an engineer, but there's nobody I know who's studied this issue more, and that's why I've asked him to be with us on the program today. Does that give you enough disclaimer leeway to work with?
I think that covers it, Jim.
Okay. So he's put together a very nice PowerPoint deck. Let's take a look at that and walk through some points, and then we can ask some questions as we go along.
Okay, so my intent here is just to try and be as factual as possible, to take us back in time to some of the events that occurred nearly 2 years ago that caused very significant damage to the town of Darien. And it started back in July of 2021. If you can go to the next slide, Jim. Tropical storm Elsa, which it was downgraded by the time it got to the Connecticut coast from a hurricane to a tropical storm, and made landfall in the town of Darien Friday, July 9th. And it caused a lot of damage. Go to the next slide, if you would. So it deposited nearly 5 inches of rain in 6 hours, the equivalent of a 50-year storm. You know, that kind of rainfall only occurs hopefully once every 50 years, but it definitely occurred on that day. Residents were advised to stay away from dangerous overflowing rivers and streams. This is a photograph of the underpass of the railroad in Darien on Post Road, and it clearly was flooded out. So later on, much long later, in September 1st, just less than 2 months, another tropical storm, again downgrade from hurricane, Ida, hovers over Darien. And next, yes, thank you, Jim. Deposited. Now this storm was really far more serious than what had come through earlier. Ida, 5.46 inches in 4 hours, 9.6 inches in 12 hours, a 500-year storm. And First Selectman Jamie Stevenson issued a red alert. You can see here.
Let me ask a question. Let me ask a question, Rolf. You know, you mentioned that one of the storms was a 50-year storm, and this one, the worst of the two, was a 500-year storm.
Yeah.
Does that mean we're only going to see a storm like that once in 50 years or once in 500 years?
Well,
what do those terms mean?
Well, it means pretty much what you said, that this type of rainfall in particular is something that should only occur once every 50 years. But, you know, and then of course, this was only supposed to be only once every 500 years, but we certainly did experience it less than 2 years ago. The thing that's happening with our atmosphere and rainstorms, particularly in Connecticut, is we're having increasing amounts of rainfall. And the types of storms are also starting to show differences from what we've known in the past. The storms are more intense. and they have a tendency to move slower. So the dwell time over the town is a longer period of time than what we've seen in the past. And so you take more rain, more concentration of rain over a longer period of time, and this is the kind of thing that's going to happen. Will this happen again in the near future? I certainly hope not, but we definitely are seeing changes occurring. Here's Tokenique Road, south of the railroad tracks there. This is the area where Goodwives River comes through the cul-de-sac under the railroad, and it, completely flooded out Tokenique Road. That road had to be rebuilt. Here's the silt deposits that came down onto 5 Mile River. You can clearly see as a result of the runoff and the drainage from that storm. So that was very significant to the marine life. Next, okay, so then September 10th, Governor Lamont visits Darien and to see and inspect and see the flood damage that occurred. And then President Biden approved the state's disaster declaration on October 31st. And so that disaster declaration allowed for FEMA to get involved on a more expedited basis. As you may recall, our head of emergencies was a very busy person dealing with all the people who had to evacuate from their homes because they were flooded out. And so we also hired a consultant to help those people fill out those applications because they are involved and they take quite a bit of time. Some of those applications may still be pending even as we speak. It's that long of a process, but hopefully with the declaration of the disaster that those will be expedited so that people can get some sort of aid. The town of Darien Board of Selectmen initiates flood area studies, and the Department of Works, while conducting flooding tests across the town, identified several culverts near Bailey Avenue and Coach Lamp Lane that needed to be expanded to accommodate higher water capacity. Shortly after the summer of 2021, the town retained Ty and Bond to study the area west of Bailey Avenue, south of West Avenue, and the area between Coach Lamp Avenue and Saltbox Lane. Those studies were issued January 11th and January 13th. Those are the final studies. It took quite some time for them to be completed.
You've seen those studies, Rolf?
I've definitely read the executive summary of the study for these Saltbox Coach Lamp area, and
it's public information now, right?
It is public information. If one takes the time and the initiative to go through the documents directory, you can find it there underneath with government documents, and then you go down further to drill down for public works. The reason why these two areas were of particular interest that came up with Ed, because these areas in the past did not really have serious flooding issues, but they did when these storms came through. These areas had flooding in the neighborhood of up to 4 and 5 feet of water. It was very, very significant. So here's the area of Coach Lamp Salt Box, and on the bottom you've got Post Road there, and on the far right is Du Bois. Okay, Jim, you're good with the cursor there.
Yep, that's Du Bois Street, and that upper right-hand corner with the green is Bakerfield.
Yeah, that's the area behind Bakerfield. Yeah,
right. And then on the left-hand side is Gardner.
Yes, sir.
And coming up diagonally off the Post Road is a dead-end street called Saltbox Lane.
Saltbox, and there's also, if you look, there's a little turn onto the right there. That's Saltbox Lane East.
Right.
And this whole area was very much affected.
And above it is Coach Lamp, coming off of Gardner and coming down to the Post Road.
Right.
So this is a fair chunk of property in Darien.
Yes, it is.
With a lot of houses that experienced flooding or came close to having flooding. I was telling Rolf before we began that I live on Du Bois Street, and our house got within 2 inches of water coming in our back door. Levels I've never seen in living here for 30 years. But other houses definitely were flooded as well too. So this is the area that has been studied by Ty and Bond. And we've heard that name, Ty and Bond. What is Ty and Bond?
Well, they're a consultant organization. They're very highly qualified in, as you mentioned earlier, hydraulics and hydrology and drainage. They've done a number of studies for the town of Darien, and they were called in here because of their expertise. They were also called in for another study that involves the Tilly Pond. That also was an area that flooded out significantly. And as a result, in February of 2022, the Darien RTM approved an appropriation for the study of the lower third of Tilly Pond watershed, which runs south from Tilly Pond to the commuter lot underneath Metro North Railroad culvert, Squab Lane, Grove Street, Brook Street, and Underpost Road. And that is a public-private study nearing final completion. That also is a tie-in bond. They were very much involved with a lot of the studies that were done for the Corbin project. So they're very familiar with the drainage in that area. So it made sense for them to take on this one as well. This is the famous koi fish that was floundering around on Brook Street at the time of Ida, I believe it was. And a gentleman, I forget his name, came to the rescue for this fish and helped it get back to Tilly Pond where it belongs. But it came quite a ways from Tilly Pond before it was rescued. So this all led up to now, with these reports becoming finalized, the town deciding to announce a town hall meeting and hearing on particularly the salt box coach lamp area study that's complete. And that's going to take place, as you mentioned earlier, on this coming, not this coming Thursday, but a week from this coming Thursday, I believe it is, on May 11th at 7 p.m. at Town Hall in the auditorium. And this drainage study, again, covers the areas of Seagate Road, Post Road, Saltbox Lane East, Coach Lamp Lane, Thomasina Lane, and Pleasant Street. The results of the drainage study will be explained in detail. That's right from the announcement. All members, and this is critical here that I want to make sure the public is aware of, is that all members of the public are invited to attend and will be given an opportunity to be heard. A portion of the meeting will be devoted to questions and answers. The town also welcomes commentary on observations and concerns. So yes, the crux of the meeting is about the salt box area, but it is not entirely devoted to that. This is an opportunity for people to come forth and share their experiences and express to the town their concerns. So it's going to be a significant meeting. The reports will, I think, have significant results for this town to consider, both from monetary viewpoint as well as the logistics of actually doing the project, should we decide to go forward with it. And so I think it's a very significant thing that all members of the town should consider participating in.
Our guest today on Community Matters is Rolf Oben, who is a member of the RTM, a member of the Public Works Committee. He's speaking on behalf of himself and not the RTM or the Public Works Committee. But as I said when I introduced him, I don't know anybody else who knows as much about the flooding issue in Darien as Rolf does, with the possible and hopeful exception of our town staff that's been working on this issue as well too, Ed Gentile and the consultants from Ty and Bond. Now, this hearing that's coming up on May 11th, Ty and Bond, I assume, is going to be presenting some of the results of their study. Do we know that for a fact, or are we just?
I don't know that. I don't know that for a fact, Jim. There's no reference in the announcement of the meeting to the effect that Ty and Bond would be present or would be doing any of the presentation. Ed Gentile was specifically mentioned as being the presenter. He and or his staff, I would assume, would be involved, certainly.
Right. And the results of this Ty and Bond study, as you mentioned, are public now. They're on the town website. And I don't want to give away what we might hear in greater detail on Thursday, May 11th, but you've had a chance to look at the study, and they do have some recommendations of what can be done to prevent the kind of flooding that we've seen should these storms occur. Is that True.
Yeah, they do have a recommendation to consider going forth with the project to upgrade the drainage in the area of Salt Box and Coach Lamp. But their recommendation is to take the drainage engineering to hold up under a 50-year storm, a storm that would occur once every 50 years. And that is a change from what's been town policy in the past, where most drainage projects have been spec'd up to a 25-year storm. But as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at a future that's going to be, I think, significantly different than what we've known in the past. The nature of the storms, the amount of rain, the amount of time that these storms hover over the town is going to be something we're going to see going in the future as well, based on all the predictions. So I think it is worth considering a 50-year standard, but that's something that I'm sure will come out in the meeting and should be thought of and discussed as part of the meeting.
And that upgrade to a 50-year storm would not have protected us from the 500-year storm.
No.
But we hope there's not going to be another 500-year storm with the frequency of the 50-year storm.
Right.
But that recommendation comes with a price tag, does it not?
Yes, it does. It doesn't come cheap.
How much are we talking about here?
Well, when this project was on the ARPA fund list, and it was earmarked there as at 1.5 million. It was kind of a placeholder for the project, but no one really knew because the Ty and Bond was still in the midst of conducting their study. But now with their study being completed and with their recommendations, the cost is far greater than what was reserved in ARPA, 4 times that of ARPA. So instead of 1.5, they're recommending a project that would be at least 6. So
$6 million.
Yeah, it's a significant difference. So,
and that may or may not include federal money through the American Recovery Plan Act funding. But that has to be spent pretty soon, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing about ARPA is there are certain types of projects that qualify. This certainly is the type of project, but yes, there's a time frame to it. It has to be filed by the end of 2024 with the government, and it has to be completed by the end of 2026. So the question becomes, is that all feasible? And so that's the kind of questions and reviews that are needed to be done. I think the ARPA committee.
I was going to say the ARPA committee, I believe, is being reformulated, restaffed because some people are not in town anymore. That's and right. I think they're going to look at what can they I guess the town doesn't want to leave money on the table unspent, but neither do they want to commit to something that they can't meet that deadline with, right?
That's right, and that's why it's being reformulated to do that very kind of review. So it's yet to be seen what the conclusions come from that. If it's not going to be continued as part of ARPA, then it'll have to be a standalone project, which will mean taxpayer funding. But then again, there are other possible means of getting government aid through, the Clean Water Act and that sort of thing, which we should certainly actively pursue. So there's a lot of questions up in the air at the moment.
Well, here's a kind of a devil's advocate question. Full disclosure, both you and I live in this affected area.
That's true.
But it's not the only area in town that might be vulnerable to this kind of a storm, right?
That is correct. The other study that's been completed involves the area of Bailey Avenue, just south of West Avenue, and that also had very significant flooding. Again, going back to Ed and his interest in these areas was the fact that in the past, these areas have not been identified as flood hazard areas, and yet they flooded very significantly with these storms. So that's part of the reason why these areas were put under study. But yes, these areas, this other area in the off of Bailey Avenue definitely flooded out. It's definitely vulnerable. We have we have so many water courses that run through our town. There's the 5 Mile River. There's Tokenique Brook, I believe it is. There's the Good Wives River. There's the Cummings Brook. There's the Stony Brook. There's the Norotan River, which borders with Stamford. And all of these trickle from north to south down through Darien and eventually, drain into Long Island Sound. So there's also the fact that we're a coastal town. There's, things to consider about the quality of that water going into Long Island Sound and what effect it may have on both, the marine life and the bird life. So it's very involved.
And this flooding that we're going to be hearing about on May 11th at the hearing at Town Hall, which will be on TV 79, by the way, but you should probably attend if you're in the affected area. This flooding is separate from coastal flooding that may be tied to global warming or rising tides or the phases of the moon and the direction of the wind.
That's
so
correct.
the town's kind of getting it on both sides, right? Along
That's
the coast correct. And then from the rivers that flow through our town down to the Long Island Sound.
That's correct. Correct. Yeah, the Superstorm Sandy was a whole different scenario than what we're dealing with these storms, because that was a tidal surge that flooded along the coastline, and this is a much different situation and just as severe in terms of its damage.
Rolf Oben, our guest today on Community Matters. He's a member of the RTM from District 4. He's a member of the Public Works Committee. He's speaking on behalf of none of those groups. He's speaking on behalf of himself as a member of the RTM, but a concerned citizen who's been following this issue rather closely. So just remind us again, why should we want to attend this hearing, and what are we going to hear about at this hearing?
Well, why I think is because this is one area, but it's not the only area that we have drainage and flood problems in the town. So the conclusions and outcomes from the meeting, and in particular to this project, could hold bearing on future considerations as well. So if you're an interested citizen or RTM member, for sure, this issue goes beyond just the area of Coach Lamp Saltbox. It has other implications. So from that perspective, I think it's definitely of interest for the citizens, the residents of Darien. And what was the other part of your question? I'm sorry.
Well, I was basically just giving you an invitation to say, why should we care? If I don't live in that area that was part of the study, or I didn't have flooding last time, why should I care? I live way up on a hill. I'm not going to get.
Well, the other reason why you should care, besides the fact that it could happen to you, is the fact that these are going to come up, I would think, in some way, shape, or form at some point in time as budget issues for the town. It is going to reflect itself in dollars and cents, which of course gets translated into the property taxes that we pay. So from that perspective, strictly from dollars and cents viewpoint, yeah, I think it's definitely worth listening in.
Okay, I hope we have given people enough of a primer on reminding us of the horrors of flooding that we've been trying to put out of our memory for the past couple of years. But in the closing credits, I'm going to put Rolf's contact information. I'll remind you about the date and time and location of the hearing where we're going to hear more about flooding. And there'll also be some other links in there that you may find useful. So stay tuned. You're going to watch this hearing on the 11th on TV 79. And I hope you all, whether you're on the RTM or not, whether you're in the study area or not, speaking for myself, I hope we all come in prepared so we can ask some good questions and get some answers from the consultants that we've been paying a lot of money to study this issue and make their recommendations. Rolf, I thank you very much for being with us on the program and putting together that PowerPoint. And I thank you for your diligence and attention to this very important issue too.
Thank you, Jim. It's been a pleasure.
Great. And thank you. Stay tuned for those credits and all that other additional information. There will be a quiz. Thank you. Thank you all for watching another edition of Community Matters.